I did a day of disability exams this past week, and as usual, I saw several people I'm pretty sure are going to be approved, and a couple of people I'm sure won't be approved. And I think their examples would be helpful if you're involved in a disability claim. Hello, I'm John Foster, and I'm a medical doctor who does Social Security disability exams. I've done over 1,500. As usual, everything I say is based on my own experience and study, and not the opinions of the Social Security Administration or any other medical body. Now, the first patient I was very pleased to see actually got useful information from one of my recent videos, where I said that if you have a condition that comes and goes, taking photos when it's present and showing them to the disability exam doctor can be very helpful. So let me explain. This patient was a woman who told me that they had lupus, or as we doctors call it, systemic lupus erythematosus. Now I have to digress a little bit and talk about autoimmune disorders. We all have an immune system, and the purpose of our immune system is to protect us from foreign things, mostly germs. Our immune system is constantly checking everything in our body and make sure that everything belongs to us and isn't something that got into us that we don't want, like a germ. If the immune system detects a germ, it immediately tries to kill it. Most of the time, our immune system works great, and that's why the reason why we can catch a cold and not die. We get better because our immune system kills off the germs. But from time to time, the immune system goes haywire and starts attacking normal tissues in our body. And rheumatoid arthritis is an instance where the immune system attacks the joint tissues in the body, causing a severe arthritis. And it can also attack all sorts of other tissues, including the heart and lungs. Systemic lupus erythematosus is another autoimmune disease where the immune system attacks the body and can attack an even broader spectrum of tissues and organs than in rheumatoid arthritis. The problem is most of the patients I see for disability exams who tell me they have rheumatoid arthritis or lupus don't. And here's why. There's a test for rheumatoid arthritis called the rheumatoid factor, and a test for lupus called the ANA, or anti-nuclear antibody. And they're both lousy tests. They both have a lot of what we call false positives and false negatives. A false positive test is when the test comes back positive, but the patient doesn't really have the disease. For both of those tests, the false positive rate can be as high as 20%. 1 in 5 normal people who are perfectly healthy may test positive for one of those diseases. A false negative is when the person has the disease, but the test is negative. And again, both lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, the tests can be negative when the patient actually has the disease. So think of those tests as suggestions rather than absolute proof. Next, I have to talk a little bit about inflammation. Inflammation is a reaction of the body. It's characterized by 4 Latin words: calor, rubor, tumor, and dolor. Calor means that the part of the body becomes warm. Tumor means that it becomes swollen. Rubor, it becomes red. And dolor, there's pain associated. If you've ever had a sore throat and looked at your throat in the mirror, you probably noticed that it was swollen and red, and of course it was painful. Those are signs of inflammation. And both rheumatoid arthritis and lupus produce inflammation. Rheumatoid arthritis produces inflammation in the joints, most typically in the joints of the hand, where it's very obvious that you can see the swelling and redness. Lupus tends to cause inflammation of internal organs, such as the kidneys, which you can't see. But it also tends to cause inflammation of the skin and causes what's known as a butterfly rash, which is where these areas of the cheek become red, so it looks like there's a red butterfly on the person's face. So this woman told me that she had lupus, and I was doing the exam, and I really wasn't seeing any signs of inflammation. There was no redness. There were no inflamed joints. I was really suspecting that she didn't actually have the disease. And then she said, I have some pictures. Would you like to see them? And thankfully, she had the pictures well organized and could pull them up immediately. And the first picture showed a classical butterfly rash of lupus that could have been taken out of a medical textbook. And the second picture showed her hands, which were normal at the time I was examining her, but which had quite pronounced joint swelling in the photo. And bam, that made the diagnosis. She had systemic lupus erythematosus. It's a very bad disease, unfortunately, but that certainly helped her disability claim. Just to let you know, many patients get erroneous diagnoses from their doctors. The patients have aches and pains, but no real signs of inflammation. The doctors do these lousy tests. One comes back positive, and the doctor tells the patient, you have rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. If all you have is aches and pains and a positive test, you do not have rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. There must be indications of inflammation in your body, generally in more than one tissue, for that to be a firm diagnosis. So the take-home measure here is if you have a problem that comes and goes, try and get some photos when it's really obvious. The second case was a patient with a problem that I see very frequently in disability exams. This was an older person in their early 60s who'd done physical work all their life, and basically their body was just wearing out. They had pains in multiple joints, and this typically will involve the low back, shoulders, knees, hips, and sometimes other joints as well. And this patient did have positive indications on their exam of problems with all those joints. Now, something to keep in mind, it's very difficult to get a disability application approved for that sort of problem if you're under age 50. Because under age 50, you have to, as Social Security describes it, meet a listing. And the listing requires the problems to be quite severe. Age 50 and above, it's much easier because you don't need to meet a listing. So I suggest for people who are close to age 50, you can always apply, but if you're denied, you might want to reapply when you're age 50 because your chances of being approved for this sort of problem where you have sore joints with limited motion and trouble moving all over the body, much easier to get approved age 50 and above. Now, I've talked about this before, but if you have joint problems that limit your ability to work, it's really helpful to be specific. People will say to me, I can't stand too long, or I can't walk too far, or I can't lift too much. And I ask them, well, how long can you stand? How far can you walk? How much can you lift? and they have a blank expression, and it's obvious to me they've never thought about it and they have no clue. That doesn't help their disability application. If you have limitations, it's really helpful if you can find out exactly what those are. Find out before your disability exam. So, for example, you can say, after standing for 15 minutes, I have to sit down for a while because my knees hurt too much. The next person had depression, and as I've mentioned before, getting approval for psychological problems for disability is fairly difficult unless the person is psychotic, which is out of touch with reality. For example, hearing voices or having false beliefs. However, it is possible, but the problems must be severe. And this patient had severe depression. The whole time they were in the room with me, they were crying, and they had a sign called psychomotor retardation, which is only seen in extremely severe depression, where the mind and the body seem to slow down, and it's like the person is thinking and moving through molasses. It's been quite some time since I saw a patient with that sign, and it's always a sign of severe depression. I did ask this person if they were thinking about self-harm, and they told me no. And I did put down in my diagnosis severe depression. And as I've said, a diagnosis of severe depression or severe anxiety is likely to be approved for disability benefits by Social Security. And now for the losers. I had two younger men who were malingering. They were trying to pretend or fake being disabled, and both failed, and I'll explain why. Both of them were complaining of problems with their bones and joints. Now here's the thing. This examination takes about half an hour, and I check all different parts of the body, the eyes, ears, nose, throat, neck, lung, heart, etc. And it's hard to keep up an act throughout the entire exam. When the attention is focused on the part that the patient is pretending to be disabled, they do a pretty good job of pretending. It's when the attention is focused on another body part that they tend to forget and not pretend. The first patient was pretending to have severe arthritis in the knee, and I always examine the knees with the patient lying flat on the table, and this patient couldn't fully extend their knee. They had what we call an extension deficit of about 20 degrees. I asked them if they could straighten out their knee any further, and they said it caused severe pain, and no, they couldn't. Fine and dandy. Then, later on in the exam, I have patients do what I call agility testing, which is walk on their tiptoes, walk on their heels, walk heel to toe like a sobriety test, squat as low as possible and come back up. And while this patient was walking on their heels, they completely extended the leg, which they told me they couldn't extend because it was too painful. And it was obvious they weren't in any pain, and they were busted. And basically, that's the end of their disability application. Similarly, the second patient complained of severe neck pain and limited range of motion. One of the things that I do is I ask patients to move their head around in as big a circle as possible to assess neck range of motion. And when I did so, this patient moved their neck about this much. I asked them if they could move it in a wider circle, and they said no. Again, fine and dandy. Less than 60 seconds later, when I stepped behind the patient to listen to their lungs with a stethoscope, apparently their left eye itched because they went like this to scratch it. Again, busted. Their range of neck motion was pretend. As I've stated in a previous video, honesty is essential if you want to get your disability application approved. Because if the doctor catches you being dishonest about anything, they're likely to suspect that you're being dishonest about everything. Well, I hope this has been helpful, and as always, remember, if it happens, it's possible.